Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Cherno Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. We're here with Carleton University's Steve Saideman. He had a really interesting blog post this last week about people freaking out over F-35s and Golden Domes and why people need to calm down. I'm going to link that below, but I figured we'd have a conversation about this. Steve, let's talk about the genesis of this.
Sure. The reality is that we are spending a fair amount of money on a couple of different weapon systems, and we live at a time where people are suspicious about working with the Americans. All of our defense planning up till now has assumed that the United States will be a reliable ally, and they're raising questions about how much cooperation we should be doing and whether the military is running ahead of the civilians on both of those systems. That there were two separate stories about this, and one story
Right.
was about the Canadian military working on Golden Dome with the Americans, even though we don't have a formal agreement with the United States on Golden Dome. And the other is the military is going ahead with the planning of the deployment of F-35s, even though there's currently a formal review about how many F-35s we will buy.
And also building infrastructure for those planes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and the thing is, we're getting F-35s. Whether we get 18, or I'm sorry, whether we get 16 or 88 or somewhere in between, we're getting some F-35s, which means we have to build the capabilities to house them. We have to send our pilots to the United States to train them. We're going to have 16 of those planes at the very least. So we're going to need to have at least some infrastructure. And the reality is that whatever we need to sustain 16, that will probably be what is necessary to sustain 888. That is, airfields that are long enough and that have the facilities to protect their stealthness or whatever it is that they need. There are particular birds that require particular kinds of infrastructure, and maybe we can just need to do it at one place rather than two if we're only buying 16. But even then, I think because we're buying 16, we'd still want to have eight at one place to eight at the other place, because that's the way our fighters work. We have two major fighter bases, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, defining coast broadly, since one's in Chicoutimi, Quebec, which is not near a coast, and the other is in Cold Lake, which is also not near a coast.
Not near a
East and west,
coast, but
east and west, I should say.
yes.
And so it probably would make sense to have them, half in one place, half in the other. And so you're going to invest in that infrastructure, whether we get 16 or 88 now. The fact that we're putting a fair amount of money into it might say, well, that's going to put the hand on the scale about the affordability of the F-35s versus other planes, because we're already doing this stuff. But we were already doing this stuff because we've made the decision. The policy decision has been made by the civilian government, and so the military is implementing that decision. They're not running ahead of the civilians on that. Now, Melanie Joly is running around talking about mixed fleets and buying other planes so that we can get more investment in Canada. And she's, Minister of Industry now, no longer Minister of Foreign Affairs, so she can say these things.
Yeah.
But I don't think she has that big of a vote on whether we continue with F-35s or not. Might be a civil crisis down the road where Carney decides we're not going to buy that many more F-35s, and the Air Force will go, that's going to cost a whole lot more to operate. And Carney will say, well, that's some other prime minister's problem, 10, 25 years down the road. Fine. And that's
Yeah.
his call to make. But that call hasn't been made, and that civil crisis hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
And we're in the same position with the Golden Dome, which is
Right.
Golden Dome, again, is a branding exercise by Donald Trump. The United States has been involved with ballistic missile defense for decades. Canada has largely stayed out of that, but Canada is still a piece of it because many of the sensors for the missiles that would fly over Canada hit the United States, those sensors are in Canada, and we
Yeah.
are partners as of 1957 with NORAD, and so that means that we are obligated by that treaty and by the desire for the Americans not to be flying that much over our airspace to provide that information as part of Team NORAD as a binational command. And so we already promised to modernize those systems because the missiles have changed, the countries launching them have changed. It used to be aimed solely at the Soviets. Well, there's no
Yeah.
Soviet Union anymore. There's a Russia. Now there's a China that has, ballistic missiles that can fly over us. And there's North Korea, most obviously, and most of the justifications these days for ballistic missile defense are aimed at how unreliable the North Koreans are.
Hmm.
So there's more launchers. There's more launchers in different places. There's different kinds of missiles. There's cruise missiles or hypersonic missiles. So we've promised to modernize NORAD because or our share of NORAD because it's on Canadian territory and that's part of the deal. That's
Right.
going to happen whether we join Golden Dome or not. But we're the input to then the American launch of anti-missile systems. They can't do it without us. And so the Canadian military is just, again, spending money that has been allocated to them by the civilian governments, Harper and then Trudeau and now Carney. And so they're not out of step with it. Now,
Yeah.
again, if Carney comes to the point where he wants to break thoroughly with the Americans, then again, there might be a rift between the civilians and the military. Phil Gass had a great post about this at one point. But that rift isn't here yet.
Yeah.
And people, demanding the rift happen now are being unrealistic because the military is just implementing the civilian orders and spending patterns. There's plenty of ways in the military in the past have not done what the civilians have asked them to do, and we could talk about that. I write about that
Hmm.
all the time. I don't think the military is really always good about obeying civilian commands, but in these cases of spending money that's been allocated to them, they're doing their job. They're doing their job
Yeah.
as they've been requested to do.
Yeah, and I think it's important just to note that, Golden Dome is just a branding exercise, and this is, the money that we're committed is the same money that we've committed for NORAD modernization. And I know I'm not sure that that message has gotten through to a lot of people.
Well, part of it is Donald Trump's fault.
Yeah.
You might be shocked that I might blame Donald Trump for some of it, but the fact is that he kept on moving the numbers around. It was $61 billion, then it became $71 billion. We don't really know what it means. And also, anytime you make a deal with Donald Trump, you really don't know what it means because he keeps on revising the deal after you made it. Like, we signed a trade agreement, but that wasn't good enough.
Yes.
So the thing
Yeah.
is, if our $61 billion contribution that he wants from us is our investment in NORAD modernization, which is expensive, and our buying F-35s, which are expensive, and together might somewhere around $71 billion, then we're fine. If he
Yeah.
decides to say, no, we want the Canada to actually pay the United States in money for Golden Dome, then we will have a crisis between the United States and Canada because that is essentially more than a year's worth of defense spending. It's a
Yeah.
lot of money. And
Yeah.
that would, there's all kinds of controversies about how far our elbows up should be, how far is sufficiently up. But paying Donald Trump for a promise, that would be at the opposite end of the elbows up scale than I think Carney wants to be, and I don't
Yeah.
think I don't think electorally he can be. And so if Donald Trump makes that kind of threat or makes that kind of demand, then we're at a crisis. But if it's a matter of measuring what our already scheduled commitments are that are in our national interest, that is to be able
Hmm.
to sense things that fly over our airspace and to have some kind of plane to fly over airspace and also contribute to missions elsewhere, then we're not going out of our way. I mean, I think one of the key things about Trump management is how far can you stay on your policy path without deviating from it to submit to his whims, yet appear to him to be doing what he wants. And Carney thus far has been brilliant at it. And I think it makes sense to try to keep that relationship in a positive way because then we
Hmm.
pay less of a price for the Mad King to the south. We'll still pay a price, but it's not as severe as it could be. And just punching Trump in the face while satisfying
Yeah.
would not be good for Canadians.
No, no. And I mean, I do have to wonder about the expectation to pay a cash thing because one of his secretaries was basically telling people that if you want to avoid tariffs, pay money to the U.S. Treasury. And so I wonder if that mindset isn't embedded in there somewhere. But yeah, I think at least rebranding the existing spending might placate somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, again, if they decide to renegotiate the deals and make further demands, then we'll have more conflict. There's no doubt about it. You
Hmm.
cannot bet that much on any particular Trump stance because they can change. You think about how he's gone back and forth on Ukraine and Russia over the past just few weeks.
Yeah.
Trump is not a reliable human being, and so you just got to play the game out. And part of the game is hoping that, or it was working Trump so that way he's favorable to Canada. So that way in three years or so, maybe he leaves the scene, or maybe he dies before then, or whatever. And then we get to a post-Trump era. Now, one of the things that's different between NATO and Canada when it comes to Trumpism is that there is some hostility to NATO within sort of the isolationist wing of the Republican Party.
Right.
It was never a very dominant voice, and traditionally the Republican Party has been pro-NATO, but now we have a warped GOP. As I keep on telling Canadians, and I told them this at the No Kings protest. The many Americans imagine Canada the same way they imagine weather, which is if you take a look at a weather map that is on the average TV station in the United States, there is nothing north of the United States. It's just not part of the imagination.
Yeah.
And so anti-Canadianness is not really a thing in the United States. Americans, even Trumpers, don't hate Canada. They just don't think about Canada.
Yeah.
Maybe the people who vie for soft lumber markets or who would like to get more milk into the country care about Canada a little bit. But it's simply, there's not animosity between the American people and the Canadian people. So when Trump goes away, the next Republican leader is not going to be spending a lot of time bashing Canada. It's just, there's all Mexico. They can bash on Mexico all they want, but there's not going to be, Canada just does not get, is not an applause line for some nationalist speech. We're just not part of the American identity of adversaries.
Okay. Um, and I guess just to, I guess, expand that out a little bit, how much is the Canadian military capable of decoupling from the American outside of NORAD?
Yes. So, well, there's two things. There's the actual doing, and then there's the political economy of weapon systems. So let me do the second one first, which is
Sure.
if the United States turns off the faucet for spare parts, we're in a pretty significant world of hurt in the short term, but that's something we could become independent from in the long term. But it would be a lot of our weapon systems require American torpedoes or American missiles or American pieces. But if the United States does that to Canada, it will be sacrificing not just Canadian relations, but relations around the world because everybody else is going, oh, I guess we ought to buy other weapon systems because the United States is no longer a reliable supplier.
Right.
So that's an issue, but I don't think it's a real issue. I think there'll be, the Canadian American firms are going to push back against that. I think the other issue, which I've been pushing the military whenever I talk to military folks, is not something 5 or 10 years down the road. It's right now, which is if things got hot in Latvia, if things got hot near Taiwan, if things got hot someplace where the Canadians are operating, what would happen to the Canadian forces if the Americans didn't show up? And we've depended critically on American infrastructure. That is medical evacuation. So that every Canadian casualty that happened in Afghanistan ultimately went through Landstuhl Air Force Base in Germany. That's an American medical facility, and that was a major. And there was also huge medical vac planes that were basically flying hospitals. So, and we also had American medevac helicopters taking the wounded from the battlefield to the big plane to Germany. And so we would not have that.
Yeah.
And that would mean more of our soldiers would die. We wouldn't have as much anti-aircraft weapon system, so there'd be more missiles and bombs getting through that would be harming Canadians in Latvia or wherever else. There'd be less able for the Canadians to target the adversary because we'd have less intelligence. We wouldn't be able to communicate as well with each other because the Allies don't all have the same comm systems, but they all can communicate with the Americans. So the Americans are a good bridge for all that.
Okay.
And that would go away. This is actually one of my next research projects is trying to pin down what is it exactly that we would lose. But when I ask the Canadian military officers about this, they don't really want to think about it.
Yeah.
Because it would completely upset the way they operate. When was the last time Canada operated alone in the world? The answer is never. And when was the last time they operated without the United States? And that would be like the first few years of World War I and in the seas and air of the first year or two of World War II.
Yeah.
But ever since then, we've operated with the Americans, particularly when things were hot, like Korea, like Kosovo and Bosnia, like Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya. Always with the Americans, always
Hmm.
relying on their advanced weapon systems, their advanced comm systems, their advanced infrastructure. And Europe was going to try to replace that, but it's going to take more than a decade.
Okay. Yeah, that was always a question I kind of had is like what the timeline is on that. But yeah, it's something to really think about in the way that things are heading south of the border. So
Yeah, it's going to. I mean, if that were to happen, it would be a huge hit on our ability to take care of ourselves and take care of our friends.
yeah,
There's no way around it. And the thing is, anybody expected Donald Trump to stand up for an ally or friend? Well, who have you been watching for the past 10 years? I mean, a
yeah,
lot of wishful thinking has gone on, but I think the Europeans are finally facing that reality. But doing the stuff necessary to become relatively independent, the Europeans can do that in the long term. We can actually never do that because guess what? Our airspace is pretty much shared.
yeah.
And so that it's going to be really hard to navigate that. I will say the one thing that people can think about for the F-35 is it's a 40-year airplane, and Trump is a 3-year problem, maybe
Maybe.
maybe a 7-year problem. I mean, he's mortal, I think, and so he's temporary, uh, but he's going to do a whole lot of damage between now and then. And so the question is, what are U.S. relations going to look like after that? I think we'll always have to be a little bit more worried.
All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Thanks for taking the time to do this, and we'll chat again in the future.
My pleasure, Dale.
All right. Cheers. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter and journodale_no_ on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.